Iran launched ballistic missiles and Shahed drones at one of the most heavily defended air bases in the Middle East. They expected a warning. They got a war. Al Dhafra Air Base sits in the desert southwest of Abu Dhabi. It hosts F-35s, F-22s, KC-135 tankers, and serves as one of the most critical U.S. power projection nodes in the entire region. Hitting it wasn't just an attack on hardware. It was a direct challenge to American deterrence in the Gulf. Iran's strike package combined Shahab-3 ballistic missiles, a system Tehran had spent years hardening and dispersing into underground cave complexes, with waves of Shahed-136 loitering munitions. The idea was saturation. Overwhelm the intercept layers, except that some weapons get shot down. Make sure enough get through to land on the front page. It worked, partially. Several rounds made it through the intercept envelope. Infrastructure was damaged. The images went global within hours. But here's what Tehran got wrong. They built their escalation calculus around a proportional American response. A targeted strike, a diplomatic warning, maybe a few cruise missiles aimed at the launchers that fired the first rounds. What they got instead was Operation Epic Fury, and by the time they understood what that meant, it was already too late to matter. The US didn't punch back. They started disassembling Iran's military layer by layer from the outside in. Wave 1 wasn't bombs. It was silence. EA-18G Growlers, the electronic warfare backbone of carrier air wings, pushed into Iranian airspace from multiple vectors simultaneously. Their ALQ-99 and next-generation jamming systems flooded every radar frequency the Iranians operated on. Ground-based search radars, fire control systems, data links between missile batteries, all of it drowned in broadband noise. For Iranian air defense operators, the picture didn't degrade gradually. It went dark, one screen at a time. With radar suppression established, the B-2 Spirits came in. 4 aircraft, the same platform that had spent the previous 2 decades proving it could operate undetected over the most contested airspace on Earth. They weren't flying to airfields tonight. They were flying to nodes, command and control bunkers, fiber optic relay stations, the hardened shelters where Iran's integrated air defense system talked to itself. Within 90 minutes of the first Growler transmission, over 60% of Iran's active air defense infrastructure was either destroyed or operating blind. The Iranians had spent billions and years under sanctions rebuilding after Israeli strikes dismantled their Russian-supplied S-300 batteries. They'd built a domestic replacement, a mobile phased array system the IDF designated the SA-65. Not as capable as the S-300, but capable enough, they thought, to threaten anything short of a full stealth strike package. The SA-65 batteries never got a clean engagement. The ones that tried to go active found an AGM-88 harm waiting for them on the other end of the emission. The AGM-88G variant has a memory like a grudge. Even if an operator switches the radar off at the last second, GPS and inertial navigation guide the warhead straight to the coordinates where the antenna was sitting when it stopped transmitting. Iran's air defense didn't fail slowly. It collapsed. Degrading the air defenses was the precondition. What happened next? To the Air Force itself, that's the part Iran can't recover from. Iran's Air Force is a museum that flies. The centerpiece of their fleet is the F-14 Tomcat, an aircraft the U.S. Navy retired in 2006. Iran has been operating its Tomcats since 1976. Spare parts have been sourced through gray markets and black markets for decades. Cannibalization rates, stripping parts from one aircraft to keep another flying, are endemic. At any given time, analysts estimate only a fraction of Iran's declared airframe inventory is actually combat capable. That inventory got smaller very quickly. F-35s and F-15Es hit hardened aircraft shelters across 4 major bases simultaneously: Isfahan, Tabriz, Bushehr, Shiraz. The targeting was methodical: shelters first, then fuel infrastructure, then the maintenance facilities that keep aging aircraft serviceable. You don't just destroy planes on the ground, you destroy the ecosystem that keeps planes flying. The irreplaceability problem is what makes this permanent. The United States absorbs losses and orders replacements. Iran, under decades of sanctions, cannot buy a single modern combat aircraft on the open market. They cannot source Western avionics. They cannot replace the engineers who know how to keep a 50-year-old Tomcat airworthy. Every airframe destroyed in those shelters represents not just a lost asset, but an irreplaceable one. For 48 consecutive hours after the strikes concluded, coalition air controllers tracking Iranian military frequency traffic recorded zero combat sortie activity. Not reduced, not degraded, zero. If you're finding this analysis useful, subscribe and hit the bell. We cover these operational breakdowns in depth every week, and the next video on how the Carrier Strike Group managed strike coordination in this operation is already in production. Three factors explain how Iran got this calculation so catastrophically wrong. First, deterrence asymmetry. Iran's doctrine since the 1980s has been asymmetric pressure, proxy networks, deniable harassment, calibrated provocation designed to impose costs without triggering full-scale retaliation. It worked for decades precisely because it stayed below the threshold. The Al-Dhafra strike crossed that threshold in a way that eliminated the ambiguity Iran had always relied on. They abandoned the doctrine that had protected them and replaced it with a direct military confrontation they were structurally unequipped to win. Second, the replacement problem. Every analysis of asymmetric conflict between a sanctions-constrained regional power and a peer military force comes back to the same asymmetry. The United States can replace what it loses. Iran cannot. American losses in the opening phase of Epic Fury were minimal and replaceable in weeks. Iranian losses in the same period were permanent. There is no sanctions waiver that lets Iran buy a modern air defense system. There is no domestic production line that builds fifth-generation fighters. What was destroyed does not come back. Third, the intelligence failure. Tehran expected a proportional response calibrated to the original strike, a tit-for-tat exchange that both sides could walk back from through back-channel diplomacy. Every previous U.S. response to Iranian provocation in the last 2 decades had followed that template. Iran extrapolated forward and assumed the pattern would hold. It didn't. The decision to treat Al-Dhafra as a campaign trigger, rather than an incident requiring a response, represents a strategic departure Iranian intelligence either didn't anticipate or didn't believe was credible. It was credible. The immediate damage is severe, but the longer-term consequences for Iran's position in the region are the part of this story that most coverage is missing. Iran's air power, already the weakest among major regional militaries by capability per airframe metrics, is now functionally non-existent as a conventional deterrent. That changes the regional calculus in ways that will play out over years, not months. Saudi Arabia has been building toward F-15SA parity with Israeli air power. The UAE operates F-35s. Israel has operated as the dominant air power in the region for decades. None of those 3 states have any reason to fear Iranian aerial retaliation anymore. The threat envelope that Iran used as leverage in regional negotiations, the implicit, "we can reach your cities," has been hollowed out. The Shahed drone factories didn't survive either. Satellite imagery confirmed strikes on the primary Shahed 136 production facilities used to supply both domestic inventory and proxy networks across Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. Iran's ability to replenish those networks, which represent the primary remaining delivery mechanism for kinetic pressure against Gulf states, has been materially degraded. Recovery timelines based on the pace of reconstruction after previous Israeli strikes on Iranian infrastructure suggest 5 to 8 years to reconstitute a functional layered air defense network, assuming sanctions relief that doesn't currently exist, a decade or more to rebuild a fighter fleet to pre-strike levels. And that assumes no further strikes during the rebuild. An assumption that, given the current regional alignment, nobody should be making. So with conventional air power gone and strategic defenses shattered, what options does Iran actually have left? Iran still has cards. They're just different cards than the ones they came into this with. The Fatah hypersonic missile program survives in hardened underground facilities. It represents the one conventional strike capability that can still credibly threaten regional targets at ranges and velocities that stress existing intercept systems. Expect Iran to prioritize protecting and expanding this program as its primary remaining deterrent. The proxy network, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias across Iraq, Houthi forces in Yemen, remains largely intact. Iran's strategy of exporting instability through deniable proxies was always the more durable leg of their doctrine. Epic Fury degraded the conventional force. It didn't reach the network. That network will be the primary vector for Iranian pressure going forward. More drone attacks, more missile harassment through proxies, more attempts to raise the cost for regional partners without triggering another direct confrontation. Cyber operations will intensify. Iran has invested heavily in offensive cyber capabilities, targeting Gulf financial infrastructure, critical systems, and information environments. It costs nothing to scale, it's nearly impossible to attribute cleanly, and it doesn't give anyone a target to bomb. The most serious long-term risk is nuclear acceleration. With conventional deterrence stripped away, the logic of a nuclear capability becomes harder for Iranian strategic planners to argue against internally. Fordo and Natanz both survived the strike campaign. Enrichment capacity remains. If Iranian leadership concludes that the conventional deterrent is permanently gone, the calculus around breakout changes fundamentally. That is the variable that every regional security analyst will be watching over the next 18 months. Iran spent decades building a military doctrine around asymmetry, ambiguity, and the assumption that no adversary would pay the political cost of a full response. On the night of Operation Epic Fury, they found out that assumption had an expiration date. The Air Force that can't be replaced is gone. The air defense network that protected it is gone. The production facilities that fed its proxy networks are gone. What remains is a state recalculating its position in a region where the rules of deterrence just changed, and where the most dangerous next move it can make is also the one it now has the most incentive to pursue. That's the question that keeps regional analysts up at night. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think Iran accelerates toward a nuclear breakout, or does the scale of the conventional loss force a strategic reset? Watch our previous breakdown covering the opening hours of the air campaign. Links on screen now. And subscribe if you want the follow-up on carrier strike group coordination. That one's coming this week.